Hello, thoughtful Libra. Have you noticed how something in your life has begun to feel slightly out of balance, as though one side has been carrying more weight than the other? Nothing dramatic may have happened yet, but situations that once seemed still are beginning to answer back. A conversation shifts, an old possibility returns, or something you thought you had accepted suddenly feels unfinished. There is a quiet movement around you now, subtle but persistent enough to make you wonder whether the balance is beginning to change. What makes this period meaningful is that the movement may be happening in two places at once. One current touches the practical side of life, delayed money, recognition you have waited for, a lost opportunity, or an exchange where what you gave and received never quite matched. The second runs beneath the surface, through feelings you carried so gracefully that you stopped noticing their weight. Rather than one dramatic miracle, this feels more like two parts of your life slowly finding their way toward equilibrium. And Libra, that matters because you may have spent a long time being patient with situations that asked more from you than they returned. You kept showing up fairly and hopefully even when little seemed to change. But what has that waiting taught you about your value? Have you been giving more than a situation gives back, or preserving peace long after the exchange stopped feeling mutual? Those questions may become increasingly important in the near future because what moves now may not return in the form you expected. An overdue financial matter could loosen, an old opportunity could reappear differently, or you may become clearer about what your time and effort are worth. At the same time, something emotional may be asking to leave your hands: a disappointment, an attachment, or the need to understand why someone behaved as they did. Sometimes the deepest return is not getting the old situation back, but recovering the part of yourself that became trapped in waiting for it. Consider what has already changed inside you before anything changes outside. Perhaps your boundaries are clearer, or you are less willing to explain yourself endlessly just to preserve harmony. Maybe you have noticed where patience became self-neglect, generosity became overextension, or hope kept you beside a door that remained closed too long. Those realizations may be the first signs that the scale is already beginning to settle. You may also notice small things catching your attention: an unusual dream, a familiar name appearing unexpectedly, a memory returning with less emotional sting, or a repeating number that makes you pause. You do not have to treat these experiences as predictions. They can simply invite you to notice what your mind and heart are processing, like rain gathering on a window and changing how you see the landscape. If the number 6 begins standing out, you might use it as a personal symbol of the balance explored here, the meeting point between giving and receiving, caring for others and valuing yourself. If another number has already been appearing, let it carry whatever personal meaning feels natural. The important question is not whether a number predicts your future, but what you notice in yourself when something repeatedly catches your attention. If you feel called to participate, leave this affirmation in the comments: I'm ready to receive what meets me with equal care, value, and intention. You can add the number that has been catching your attention, whether it is 6 or something personal to you. Let the words become less a promise about what life must deliver, and more a statement of what you are willing to receive, and what you are becoming less willing to settle for. Because this period is not asking you to sit still and wait for proof, Libra. It is asking you to notice how the relationship between what you value and what you tolerate is changing. What once required patience may soon require a decision, and what seemed lost may reveal another kind of opportunity once you see it without the weight of old expectations. There is something quietly powerful about that threshold, like a tide turning before the shoreline reveals how far the water will move. Astrologically, there is a useful way to understand these themes without tying them to one dramatic date or promising a specific event. Mercury speaks to messages, negotiations, information, and conversations that create movement, while Venus, your ruling planet, draws attention to value, relationships, money, and reciprocity. Together, these symbols can direct your attention toward unanswered messages, unfinished conversations, compensation, or agreements that no longer feel evenly weighted. The point is not that everything suddenly becomes effortless, but that you may see more clearly where communication and value need to meet. Jupiter adds the symbolism of expansion, a wider perspective, and the willingness to imagine possibilities beyond familiar limits. Financially, that can mean reconsidering what stability means, including how confidently you value your work, time, and energy. A disappointing delay may become an opportunity to renegotiate or recognize where you accepted less than you needed. Growth does not always arrive as a larger number. Sometimes it begins when your standards change. Saturn brings a slower, more demanding perspective. Its symbolism masks what waiting has taught you, where responsibility belongs, which boundaries needed strengthening, and whether patience became a habit of carrying too much. Rather than declaring every lesson complete, notice where an old pattern has become impossible to ignore. Imagine a scale settling after one side has held too much weight for too long. Once you recognize the imbalance, it becomes harder to relate to it in the old way. That is the deeper threshold here, and it does not require midnight or a particular date to become meaningful. It can happen on an ordinary afternoon when you suddenly understand why a relationship exhausted you, why a financial situation kept bothering you, or why something you once wanted no longer fits who you are becoming. It is like a garden after several quiet days of rain. Little seems to happen above the soil, while underneath, roots are loosening and new growth is finding room. This is why the two currents remain important. One may be external, a payment, an answer, renewed recognition, a corrected agreement, or an opportunity returning differently than expected. The other is internal, realizing you no longer need to chase the same validation, carry the same resentment, or prove your worth inside an unequal exchange. One changes what becomes available around you. The other changes what you are willing to accept. There is no need to force that internal movement. Give yourself a few quiet minutes and notice what happens in your body when you think about unresolved situations, where your shoulders tighten, your breathing changes, or relief appears when you imagine releasing an old expectation. Presence can reveal what constant effort covers over. Perhaps you are not as far behind as you believed. Perhaps you were measuring progress by outcomes that depended too heavily on someone else's response. You may have experienced this recognition before. Nothing visible changes, yet something inside becomes still, like muddy water left undisturbed long enough to become clear. Some understand that stillness through faith and call it the presence of God. Others experience it as intuition, emotional clarity, or simply becoming quiet enough to hear what was beneath the noise. You do not need to force one interpretation for the experience to matter. So ask yourself, have you sensed something changing before you could explain it? Perhaps an old concern no longer grips you the same way, or a possibility you dismissed has returned from another angle. Instead of treating that feeling as proof of a predetermined future, let it make you more observant. Sometimes the first evidence of change is that you respond differently to circumstances that once controlled your emotional weather. For Libra, this is ultimately a story about relationship not only with other people, but with money, fairness, receiving, and your own value. Whether you approach it spiritually, psychologically, religiously, or simply with curiosity, the invitation is similar. Notice where life is asking for a more honest exchange. What are you still waiting to receive, and what has the waiting taught you? What changes when abundance becomes about more than what suddenly lands in your hands? That leads naturally to the Six of Pentacles, one of Tarot's clearest images of giving and receiving. Here, balance becomes practical: who contributes, who receives, who decides what something is worth, and whether generosity is met with respect. This theme might appear around delayed payment, a refund, corrected compensation, an old client or opportunity resurfacing, or someone finally acknowledging what you contributed. The specific outcome is less important than the underlying question: is the exchange becoming fairer? And there is another layer to that card. Receiving does not mean being rescued, just as generosity does not require you to keep pouring after your cup has run low. A practical return can matter because it reflects recognition, an agreement honored, your work valued more accurately, or your willingness to ask for terms that reflect what you bring. Like a tide beginning to turn around stones that have stood still for years, the movement may start quietly, and what it reveals about your value may matter as much as what eventually returns to your hands. The star offers a quieter way of understanding what has been unfolding for you, Libra. It does not promise that every effort will return exactly as you imagined, but it speaks to the kind of hope that survives when you keep tending something despite seeing little evidence of progress. Think of roots beneath winter soil. The surface may look still, while an entire hidden structure remains alive underneath. Your consistency may have been doing something similar, strengthening your sense of value before the outside world was ready to reflect it. That is why a financial correction in the near future does not need to arrive dramatically to matter. It could be an unexpected deposit, a fee or policy adjusted in your favor, a returning client, or someone finally honoring an unresolved agreement. The amount itself may matter less than the feeling that an exchange which once leaned too heavily in one direction has begun to straighten. And if you have ever thought, if this truly belongs to me, I don't need to destroy my peace chasing it, there is wisdom in that when it is paired with practical action. Staying open does not mean becoming passive, and trust does not mean ignoring emails, contracts, negotiations, or overdue conversations. It means refusing to let uncertainty consume your attention while you continue doing what remains within your control. For Libra, the difference between surrender and self-abandonment can be especially revealing. This is also a good time to consider how you care for what is already in your hands. Think of your money in three directions: what protects your stability, what supports future growth, and what allows you to care for your present life without guilt. Beyond being practical, this reminds you that receiving more and managing well belong to the same conversation. You begin relating to money with greater clarity instead of treating it as something that simply arrives and disappears. Money can carry far more emotion than the numbers reveal. If financial uncertainty has left your shoulders tight, your breathing shallow, or your thoughts racing, those reactions deserve attention. Not because stress magically prevents money from reaching you, but because pressure can make clear decisions harder to recognize. Place a hand over your chest and ask, what would I do differently if I were no longer making this decision from pressure? Give the answer enough silence to become specific. Perhaps you would ask for what you are owed, renegotiate something you have tolerated, save without treating every possibility as an emergency, or stop attaching your worth to one financial outcome. This is where material stability and emotional balance begin touching each other. When every financial decision no longer feels like an alarm, choices that anxiety pushed into the background can become visible again. This is why an ordinary financial development can carry surprising emotional weight. Imagine finally receiving compensation from a former employer after months of uncertainty. The money may help practically, but the deeper response may be recognizing that your work had value and asking for fair treatment was never unreasonable. Sometimes what restores hope is not the size of what returns, but the correction of a story that taught you to doubt yourself. So consider this, Libra. If financial relief or recognition reached you today or in the near future, what would you want it to change beyond your bank balance? Would you breathe differently, create more security, make a postponed decision, or finally look ahead without measuring every possibility against an old disappointment? Sometimes we think we are waiting for money when what we are really longing for is room to feel safe again. And this is where the second current becomes more visible. A practical return may draw your attention first, while emotional release can arrive more quietly, as a long breath, unexpected tears when a familiar name surfaces, or someone from the past appearing in a dream. A memory you thought was settled may return, because your relationship to it is beginning to change. That does not necessarily mean you are moving backward. Sometimes an old feeling rises because you finally have enough distance to meet it without becoming submerged in it. Healing can resemble rain sinking into dry ground. There is no single dramatic instant when everything turns green, only a gradual softening that allows new growth. What begins loosening may be grief, resentment, attachment, or the part of you that kept waiting for someone else to provide an explanation. These two movements are connected, but not because emotional release guarantees money will appear. They meet through the deeper theme of value, what you deserve in exchange, what you continue carrying after it ends, and how much of yourself you sacrifice to preserve balance on the surface. One current asks you to receive more fairly. The other asks what no longer needs to be held so tightly. The Ace of Cups brings that quieter movement into focus. It often symbolizes emotional renewal, tenderness, and the possibility of loving from a place with more room to breathe. But it can also speak to an old ache finally being acknowledged. Before a cup can hold something fresh, sometimes you have to notice what has occupied it for too long. Letting go does not erase what mattered, it changes how much of your present life the past is allowed to occupy. Forgiveness becomes meaningful when it stops being something you perform for another person and becomes a way of loosening resentment's hold on your own life. Libra, that may involve a parent, a partner, a friendship that ended without the understanding you wanted, or an earlier version of yourself you have judged too harshly. Softening does not require you to excuse what happened, reopen a relationship, or minimize the wound. Sometimes it simply means deciding that the past no longer deserves unlimited space in the room you live in today. Water offers a fitting symbol for this kind of emotional movement because it adapts when the landscape changes. Rain against a window, dreams of oceans, a walk beside a river, or the relief of a long bath can become gentle invitations to notice what is moving through you. They do not need to be supernatural signs to carry meaning. Like a river finding its way around stone, emotion often needs somewhere to move rather than another place to remain contained. So give some attention to what your heart has been carrying without immediately turning it into a confrontation or problem to solve. In a quiet moment, write the name of someone, or perhaps a former version of yourself, who has occupied more emotional space than you want to keep giving them. Instead of retelling the entire history, write one sentence about what you are ready to stop carrying. If forgiveness feels premature, begin with, "I forgive myself for carrying this for as long as I needed to." Genuine release cannot be forced. Resentment may once have protected a boundary, helped you recognize an injustice, or reminded you that something mattered, and healing does not require you to shame yourself for feeling it. What can change is the role that pain plays in your present decisions. You can remember what happened without allowing it to keep choosing your relationships, expectations, or sense of worth. Consider someone carrying both emotional pain and financial consequences from a difficult family relationship. If she eventually chooses to forgive privately, the important change is not that forgiveness magically produces money. She may simply have more attention available for her finances, notice an overdue opportunity, follow up on forgotten work, or make decisions without the old wound sitting beside her. Emotional release does not guarantee abundance, but it can change what you see and how clearly you respond. And that brings you back to a deeper question. Libra, who or what are you ready to stop carrying in the same way? You do not need a dramatic goodbye or to share private details before you are ready. Release can begin with the recognition that an old story no longer gets to define every new chapter. If you feel comfortable, your comment can hold that intention in a few words. I'm making room for peace. As that inner space changes, you may become more aware of your physical surroundings. A familiar room can suddenly feel different, like a chair sitting at the wrong angle or afternoon light revealing clutter you stopped noticing. You may want to move furniture, clear a shelf, spend more time near water, or create a corner where silence feels easier to find. Our environments often preserve older versions of our routines long after something inside us has begun to change. In astrological symbolism, the fourth house is associated with home, roots, privacy, belonging, and emotional foundations. Rather than assuming a particular fourth house transit applies to every Libra, use that symbolism as a question. Does the place where you live still support the person you are becoming? Has your definition of safety changed? Which parts of your environment were chosen because you genuinely loved them, and which were arranged mainly to accommodate somebody else? This is where Libra's relationship with balance becomes more interesting than simply wanting harmony. You can become so skilled at adjusting around other people's preferences that something remains functional long after it stops feeling like yours. The same pattern can appear in your schedule, routines, quiet time, and objects kept from an old relationship or identity. When your surroundings stop reflecting your inner priorities, discomfort can become useful information. You do not need to reinvent your entire home in response. Turn your desk toward natural light, change the bedding, clear a drawer, move an emotionally charged object, or open a window and notice what fresh air changes. Small environmental shifts can give your nervous system tangible evidence that something is different now. Sometimes 15 intentional minutes in one neglected corner can create the exhale you did not realize you needed. Color can support that process because your sensory environment influences how a space feels. Soft ocean blue can echo emotional movement. Pearl white can suggest openness and clarity. Muted green can evoke restoration, and dusty rose can gently reflect Venus and Libra's relationship with beauty, affection, and value. Choose what makes the room feel less like a museum of where you have been and more like somewhere your present self can breathe. If you enjoy numerology, the numbers 2 and 11 can remain gentle, symbolic companions here. 2 lends itself to partnership, reciprocity, and the space between people, while 11 is often associated in numerological traditions with heightened awareness and transition. Neither needs to be treated as proof that an event is destined to occur. They can simply remind you to notice what is changing between your inner world and the life you have built around it. If numbers like 2 or 11 have been catching your attention on clocks, receipts, addresses, or other ordinary places, you do not have to decide whether they are signs for them to feel meaningful. Sometimes a repeated symbol simply interrupts automatic thought long enough for you to notice what has been occupying your mind. You might ask what you were thinking about just before the number appeared, or which decision has quietly followed you through the day. The same thing can happen when you make one small change to your surroundings. Rearranging a bookshelf, clearing a box connected to an old relationship, or moving your workspace toward natural light can change how you feel inside a familiar room. By interrupting a pattern that had become invisible, you may notice an overdue email, feel more prepared for a difficult conversation, or recognize an opportunity that was already nearby. That does not mean moving a chair causes the universe to send you something new. The deeper relationship is between environment, attention, and behavior. When your surroundings feel less crowded by the past, you have more room to respond to the present. Libra, this matters because you can become so accustomed to adjusting around other people's needs that you barely notice how much of your own rhythm has been negotiated away. So, if you have felt unusually restless in familiar surroundings, consider what needs rearranging, not only in your room, but in your schedule, habits, postponed conversations, or inner dialogue. You do not need to rebuild your life overnight. Sometimes the first step is simply standing in your own space and asking, what here no longer reflects the person I am becoming? The answer may be ordinary, opening a window, removing an object tied to another chapter, moving toward more light, or clearing somewhere your eyes can rest. Perhaps what needs moving is not furniture at all, but a commitment maintained from guilt or a routine built around someone else's priorities. Change rarely needs thunder. Sometimes it begins when you realize you no longer want to organize your present around an older version of yourself. This kind of change suits Libra because balance is rarely restored through one enormous gesture. A scale settles through small adjustments, just as one honest boundary, altered routine, or decision made without excessive accommodation can gradually reshape your life. What is unfolding does not require urgency as much as it requires your attention. Simple practices can give an internal intention somewhere concrete to land. Write down what you want to make room for. Say, I'm ready if it feels true, or place your hand over your chest for a few quiet breaths. These actions do not control what happens next. They help you hear your priorities clearly enough to make choices that support them. Intention becomes more useful when understood as a sequence rather than a mysterious force. What you notice shapes your attention. Attention influences decisions. Repeated decisions become habits, and habits gradually change the life you experience. Fear can make every choice feel urgent, while a calmer mind often gives you enough space to recognize more than one path forward. So if you write, I open the door to what I deserve, let it become a question too. What would deserving better actually ask of you to negotiate? Follow up, rest, decline something, accept help, or stop chasing an exchange that keeps showing you its limits. Words become meaningful when your choices begin meeting them. The goal is not to make the universe hear you more clearly, but to hear yourself with less interference. Momentum can grow through actions that seem almost too small to matter. Drinking water before automatically reaching for your phone, stretching before bed, clearing one neglected surface, sending the message you have rewritten repeatedly, or forgiving yourself can interrupt an old pattern. One action makes another easier until what once seemed immovable begins to feel less permanent. I think of someone who created a tiny morning ritual around her first glass of water. She simply paused before drinking and practiced gratitude, and over time her mornings became calmer and her thoughts less scattered. Later, a job opportunity arrived after a long period of uncertainty. The ritual did not cause the offer, but becoming less consumed by anticipation helped her meet what arrived from a steadier place. That is the kind of receptivity worth cultivating, Libra. It is less about waiting for a miracle to prove you were right to hope, and more about being present enough to recognize movement when it comes as an opportunity, a boundary, an answer, or clearer knowledge of what you want. Sometimes readiness begins when you stop bracing against every unknown possibility. If you feel called to mark that intention, leave a few words in the comments. I'm ready to receive what meets me with equal care, value, and intention. Or choose your own sentence, one that reflects what you are genuinely prepared to practice. Let it name the direction you want your choices to take, then notice which quiet adjustment asks for your participation next. More importantly, Libra, you are not standing at the edge of your own life, waiting for someone else to decide when you may enter it. You do not have to be chosen, rescued, or transformed before responding to what is changing. Your participation lives in the boundaries you keep, the conversations you have, the opportunities you notice, and the choices you make when nobody is there to reassure you. Ask yourself whether you are genuinely available for something different as you are now. Could you receive recognition without questioning whether you deserve it, accept support without feeling indebted, or allow a relationship to become more mutual without doing all the emotional work yourself? If you have maintained balance by carrying extra weight, those questions can reveal an entirely different kind of balance. Some of the most important turning points arrive quietly. They happen when you send the message, ask about the overdue payment, move an object connected to another chapter, or admit that a relationship no longer feels reciprocal. The threshold can appear in an ordinary day when your familiar response is still available, but for the first time, you choose differently. That is the deeper meaning of the two currents moving through this story. One concerns money, compensation, opportunities, recognition, and exchanges becoming fairer. The other concerns what you have carried emotionally and which old expectations no longer deserve authority over you. Both ultimately ask the same question. What happens when your outer choices begin reflecting the value you are learning to recognize within yourself? A financial correction, if it comes, does not have to prove that patience has been rewarded. It can become an opportunity to save more thoughtfully, negotiate with confidence, receive without apology, or recognize that your contribution deserved acknowledgement. Emotional healing works similarly. It is the gradual return of inner space, once the past no longer occupies every available room. And Libra, waiting may have taught you more than you wanted to learn. Generosity may have asked too much of you. Compassion may have become exhausting, and honesty may have threatened the harmony you tried to preserve. Yet those experiences can teach you the difference between peace and avoidance, patience and postponing yourself, loving someone and continually negotiating against your own needs. So consider these questions carefully. If your life could become more balanced from here, how would you behave differently today? Which habit would you interrupt? Which boundary would you defend? Whom could you forgive without inviting them back into the same role? And what deserves an honest yes or an overdue no? Beneath those questions is another. What part of yourself are you ready to reclaim from the waiting? Maybe it is confidence around money, trust in your judgment, the willingness to ask for reciprocity, or energy spent replaying a conversation that never gave you closure. Reclaiming it does not require a dramatic declaration. It can begin like water returning to a dry channel, finding directions through one decision at a time. This is where insight becomes participation. Honor your body when exhaustion tells you an arrangement costs too much. Your voice when something needs to be said. And your future when today's choices stop repeating yesterday's compromises. Give that change a physical shape through one action: a follow-up email, a revised budget, a cleared corner, a boundary expressed clearly, or a few quiet minutes that belong entirely to you. And if you want to anchor that intention in words, choose an affirmation you can actually live. You might write, "I am ready," or "I open the door to what meets me with equal care, value, and intention." The point is not to convince the universe of anything. It is to name what you want your choices to begin supporting. There is something quietly powerful about doing that alongside others who are also reconsidering fairness, healing, and self-respect. You do not have to share every detail to recognize yourself in someone else's courage or uncertainty. Sometimes knowing that others are also releasing what no longer fits can make an uncertain threshold feel less solitary. So whatever develops from here, Libra, remain curious rather than demanding immediate proof. Hope can exist beside discernment, openness beside boundaries, and receiving beside the wisdom to question whether what returns still belongs in your life. Perhaps that is the deeper recalibration taking shape, not the promise that everything you once wanted will return, but the growing ability to decide what deserves to move forward with you as the balance continues shifting, one deliberate choice at a time.